the church door opened, and the winter came in with him. I was standing at the altar of St. Clement's, a bride in white, a puppet in silk, when the sound of the door made every head in the nave turn. And what they saw stopped them. He stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark greatcoat still wet with snow, his boots leaving prints on the stone floor as though he had ridden through a storm to reach this place. His face was cut from something colder than the weather, angular, aristocratic, brutally controlled, with ice-blue eyes that moved through the congregation the way a blade moves through cloth, precisely, without hurry, finding what it was looking for. Me, his eyes found me, and stopped, for a fraction of a second, a fraction so small that no one else in that church would have caught it. The cold cracked, something moved behind those blue eyes, something fast and fierce and agonized like a river under ice. Then it was gone, sealed over, locked away, and the mask was back. Perfect, glacial, terrifying. He walked forward, not fast, not slow, with the unhurried, absolute certainty of a man who knows that no one in the room will stop him, because no one in the room outranks him, not the vicar, not the groom, not the uncle who had arranged this theater, not the 100 silk and satin guests who had come to watch a girl be given to a monster and call it a wedding. Lord Vane, my groom, my sentence, the man whose gambling debts were being paid with my inheritance and whose temper was being soothed with my body, turned from the altar. His face, which was handsome in the way that sharp things are handsome, went white. "Thornleigh," he said. What is the meaning of—" The Duke of Thornleigh did not look at him. He looked at me, only at me, and in a voice so quiet that the people at the back of the church had to lean forward to hear it. A voice that was not a shout, not a command, not a threat, but something far more dangerous. "A certainty," he said. "Step away from her." 100 wedding guests froze. The vicar's prayer book trembled in his hands. The organist's fingers hovered above the keys. The bridesmaids, Lord Vane's sisters, who had dressed me that morning with the brisk efficiency of women dressing a carcass for the oven, stood motionless, their bouquets forgotten. Lord Vane recovered first. He always recovered first. It was the one skill a lifetime of gambling had given him, the ability to reassemble his composure after a loss. "You have no right," he began. "I have every right," said the Duke, still quiet, still looking at me. "I have the right of a man who has been searching for this woman for 8 years. I have the right of a man who was told she had gone abroad when she was locked in an attic 12 miles from my door. And I have the right," here his voice dropped lower, "and the ice in it could have frozen the Thames, of a man who will not stand in the house of God and watch a woman be sold to pay another man's debts." He extended his hand, not to Lord Vane, not to my uncle, to me. His gloved hand, steady as stone, offered to a bride in a dress she had not chosen, at a wedding she had not wanted, in a church full of people who had not asked. "Honoria," he said, and his voice, when he said my name, the ice broke entirely, and what was underneath was not cold at all. "Come with me." I took his hand. "My name is Honoria Blackwell. I was born to Edward and Catherine Blackwell of Hartwood House in the county of Derbyshire, a gentle, modest estate with apple orchards, a trout stream, and a library that my mother called the only room in England where time behaves itself. We were not rich by the standards of dukes and earls, but we were comfortable, and more importantly, we were loved. My father played the cello badly and with great enthusiasm. My mother painted watercolors of the garden in every season. They adored each other with the quiet, unshowy devotion of people who have never needed an audience for their happiness. They died when I was 16. A carriage accident in December, on a frozen road outside Buxton. They were coming home from a concert. The horse slipped. The carriage overturned. They were gone before anyone could reach them. I inherited Hartwood House, the orchards, the stream, the library where time behaved itself, and approximately £8,000 in funds. I also inherited a guardian, my father's younger brother Gerald Blackwell, a man I had met perhaps 5 times in my life, who arrived at Hartwood 3 days after the funeral, with a solicitor, a valise, and the particular expression of a man who has just discovered that grief can be profitable. Uncle Gerald was not cruel, exactly. He was worse than cruel. He was weak. Weakness with power is the most dangerous combination on earth because a weak man with authority will do anything to avoid the discomfort of being opposed and will sacrifice anyone to maintain the fiction that he is in control. He moved into Hartwood House. He dismissed the servants I loved. He sold my mother's watercolors and my father's cello. He managed my inheritance, which meant he spent it on his own debts, his own comforts, his own disastrous investments in mining schemes and canal ventures that collapsed one after another like dominoes. By the time I was 20, the £8,000 was gone. By the time I was 22, Hartwood House itself was mortgaged. By the time I was 24, Uncle Gerald had found the final solution to his financial ruin. Lord Edwin Vane, a viscount with a gambling habit and a violent temper, who was willing to marry a girl with nothing if her uncle would sign certain documents transferring the remains of the Blackwell estate into Vane's name. I was the remains, I was the estate, I was the final asset to be liquidated. I said no loudly, clearly, repeatedly, in language that would have made my mother blush and my father proud. I said no until Uncle Gerald locked me in the east bedroom and told me I would stay there until I understood the necessity of the situation. I stayed there for 6 weeks. I need to tell you about the boy. When I was 8 years old and he was 12, there was a boy who lived on the estate next to ours, a vast, imposing property called Thornleigh Park, with formal gardens and a lake so wide you could not see the other side on a foggy morning. His name was Calum Hale. He was tall for his age, skinny, with dark blonde hair that fell into his eyes and ice blue eyes that people found unsettling in a child. He was the only son of the Duke of Thornleigh, the old Duke, a cold and distant man who believed that sons were investments and affection was a weakness. Calum was lonely. The particular loneliness of a child raised in a palace with no one to play with, educated by tutors who feared his father, surrounded by servants who bowed but did not speak, and expected from the age of 6 to behave as though he had already inherited the title and the responsibility and the vast, crushing weight of being a Hale. I met him at the lake. He was trying to skip stones and failing, throwing too hard, too flat, the stones plunging into the water like accusations. I watched from the fence that divided our properties, and after his 5th failed throw, I said, "You're holding it wrong." He looked at me. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody corrected him. Nobody, not in his entire, supervised, overmanaged life, had ever told the heir to the Duke of Thornleigh that he was doing something wrong. "Show me," he said. I climbed the fence, tearing my dress, which I did not care about, and picked up a flat stone and skipped it 4 times across the water. "Wrist," I said, "not arm." "The power comes from the flick, not the throw," he tried. "3 skips, better," I said. He smiled. It was, I think, the first real smile I had ever seen on his face, quick and surprised, as though his own happiness had caught him off guard. After that, we met at the lake almost every day for 4 years. We skipped stones. We built dams in the stream. We climbed trees that would have given both our parents heart failure. We talked about books, about horses, about the shapes of clouds, and whether fish had feelings, and why grown-ups made everything so complicated. He told me things he told no one, that his father frightened him, that the house was too big, that he sometimes stood at the window of his bedroom at night and counted the stars because they were the only things that felt the right size. I told him things. I told no one that I was afraid of thunder, that I wanted to see the sea, that I thought the world would be better if everyone had to climb at least one tree before they were allowed to make important decisions. When I was 12, his father sent him to Eton. He left in September. He promised to write. He did write 3 letters, warm and awkward, and full of the kind of detail that meant he was thinking of me. "The Thames is not as good as our lake. The stones here are too round." Then the letters stopped. I did not know, could not have known that his father had intercepted them. That the old Duke, upon discovering his heir was corresponding with a minor baronet's daughter, had destroyed the letters and informed Calum that the Blackwell girl had not replied because she had moved on and forgotten him. Calum believed it. He was 12. He believed his father. And when my parents died 4 years later, Uncle Gerald completed the separation. He cut all ties with the Thornleigh estate. He told me because it was convenient, because it removed a complication that the Hale family wanted nothing to do with the Blackwells, and that young Lord Thornleigh had never asked after you. I believed it. I was 16, I was grieving. I believed everything my uncle told me because I had no one left to tell me otherwise. For 8 years, the boy who skipped stones on the lake believed I had forgotten him, and the girl who taught him to flick his wrist believed he had never cared at all. Calum inherited the title at 22. When his father died of a stroke brought on, the servants whispered, by rage at a tenant who had dared to ask for a roof repair. The new Duke of Thornleigh was not his father, but the world, which had spent 22 years watching the old Duke, assumed the son was the same, cold, distant, unapproachable. Calum did nothing to correct this assumption. Coldness, he had learned, was armor. If people feared you, they did not bother you. If they did not bother you, they could not disappoint you, and if they could not do what the one person he had cared about had done, forget you. He ran the estate with ruthless efficiency. He modernized the farms, he rebuilt the tenants' cottages, he funded a school, he paid fair wages, and he did all of it alone, without warmth, without connection, without the messy, vulnerable, unbearable complication of caring about another human being. The Ton called him the cold Duke. He let them. It was easier than the truth that he was not cold at all, that behind the ice there was a boy standing at a lake with a flat stone waiting for a girl who had taught him how to throw. He had tried to find me. After his father's death, when the letters and the lies came to light, he had searched. But Uncle Gerald had been thorough. No forwarding address, no social connections, no trail. The Blackwells had simply vanished, as minor families do when there is no one with the power to look for them, until Mrs. Kemp. Mrs. Kemp had been the Blackwell housekeeper for 20 years, the woman who had known my mother, who had held me as a baby, who had been dismissed by Uncle Gerald the week he arrived. She had gone to service in another household. She had never stopped listening, and in December of 1822 she heard a rumor that Honoria Blackwell was to marry Lord Edwin Vane at St. Clement's Church on the 23rd of the month. She wrote to the Duke of Thornleigh. One line, "The girl you asked about is being married against her will on Thursday. St. Clement's, come quickly." Calum read the letter at 9 o'clock on Wednesday night. He was on his horse by 1:15. Thornleigh Park is 47 miles from St. Clement's. Calum rode through the night, through snow, through freezing rain, through darkness so complete that the road existed only as a feeling beneath his horse's hooves. He changed horses twice, once at the coaching inn at Matlock, once at a farmer's stable where he paid the man £10 for a draft horse and did not wait for change. He did not sleep, he did not eat, he did not stop except for the horses, because horses, unlike dukes, have the good sense to require rest. What drove him was not heroism, it was not romance, it was fury, the cold, bright, clarifying fury of a man who has just discovered that the one thing he lost was not lost but taken, that the girl he had grieved for, mourned for, carried inside himself like a stone in his pocket for 8 years, was not gone. She was 12 miles away, locked in a bedroom by an uncle who had stolen her money and was now selling her body to cover his debts. He arrived at St. Clement's at 11 in the morning. The ceremony was set for noon. He had 1 hour, he did not use it. He sat on his horse in the churchyard in the snow and he waited. Not because he was uncertain, he had never been more certain of anything in his life, but because he wanted to walk through the door at the precise moment when it could not be undone. Not before the ceremony, when lawyers could intervene and uncles could negotiate and the whole sordid business could be repackaged and rescheduled at the moment of the vow, in front of 100 witnesses in the house of God, where no one could pretend it hadn't happened. They dressed me at 7 o'clock on the morning of my wedding, and I did not fight them. I had stopped fighting 6 weeks ago when Uncle Gerald locked the door and I understood, with the clarity that comes only from despair, that fighting was a luxury I could no longer afford. Fighting required hope. Hope required the belief that someone, somewhere, would come. That the world contained someone who remembered me, cared about me, would notice that I had disappeared. I believed no such person existed. The dress was expensive. Lord Vane had insisted. A white silk gown with seed pearls and a lace veil that cost more than the wages my uncle owed the servants he had dismissed. I wore it the way a prisoner wears a uniform, with the detached mechanical compliance of a person who has stopped inhabiting her own body. Lord Vane waited at the altar. He was 35, dark-haired, broad-faced, with the kind of good looks that come from wealth and confidence rather than from any particular quality of feature. His eyes were brown and flat, the eyes of a man who calculates everything and feels nothing. He looked at me as I walked up the aisle the way a man looks at a bill of sale, with satisfaction at the price. My uncle walked beside me, sweating in his good coat, his hand gripping my arm, not out of affection but out of fear, Fear that even now, even at the last moment, I might bolt. I would not bolt. There was nowhere to bolt to. The vicar opened his book. The congregation settled, the ceremony began, and then the door opened, and the winter came in. I have already told you what he said. Let me now tell you what happened after. When the Duke of Thornleigh said, "Step away from her," and Lord Vane said, "You have no right," and the Duke replied with the devastating calm of a man who has ridden 47 miles through the snow and has no patience left for men who buy women, the church erupted, not into noise, into movement, the kind of silent, panicked, sideways movement of people who have just realized they are witnesses to something that will be discussed in every drawing room in England for the next 10 years. My uncle tried to speak. This is preposterous. The arrangements have been made. The documents are signed." "The documents," said the Duke, "were signed by a guardian who has spent 8 years embezzling his ward's inheritance. I have the records. My solicitor has the records. The Court of Chancery will have the records by Monday morning. If you wish to discuss documents, Mr. Blackwell, I suggest you discuss them with a lawyer." Uncle Gerald went gray. Not white, gray. The color of a man whose bluff has been called and whose hand is empty. Lord Vane stepped forward. He was taller than the Duke, broader, and accustomed to physical intimidation. The casual menace of a man who had used his size to frighten women, servants, and creditors into compliance. "You cannot walk into a church and take another man's bride," he said. "She is mine, the contract. She is not yours." The Duke's voice did not rise, it did not need to. "She has never been yours. She is not a contract, she is not a transaction, she is not a debt to be settled or an asset to be liquidated. She is Honoria Blackwell. She is the daughter of Edward and Catherine Blackwell of Hartwood House, and she is coming with me." He turned to me. His hand was still extended, steady, patient, waiting. "Honoria," he said again, and then so quietly that only I could hear. "The power is in the wrist, not the throw." The world stopped. Everything, the church, the guests, the vicar, the uncle, the groom, the seed-pearl dress and the veil that cost more than a servant's yearly wage, everything fell away, and I was 8 years old again, standing at a lake teaching a lonely boy to skip stones. "Calum," I whispered. "I found you," he said. "I'm sorry, it took 8 years." I took his hand. I stepped down from the altar. I walked past Lord Vane, who reached for my arm and found his wrist caught, gently, precisely, irresistibly by the Duke's other hand. "If you touch her," said the Duke of Thornleigh, "I will break every bone in your hand." Quietly, Lord Vane released me. We walked down the aisle together, past 100 frozen guests, past the vicar with his trembling prayer book, past the uncle with his gray face and his empty hand, and out through the church door into the snow. His horse was waiting. His coat was still wet. The world was white and cold and silent, and I was no longer a bride, and I was no longer a prisoner. And the boy from the lake had come. He brought me to Thornleigh Park. I had not seen the house in 12 years. Not since I was a child, climbing the fence to reach the lake. It was exactly as I remembered and nothing like what I remembered. The formal gardens were grander. The house was larger. And the lake, our lake, the stone-skipping lake, was frozen, its surface covered in a thin layer of snow that made it look like a blank page waiting to be written on. I was given a room, warm, firelit, with fresh clothes and a tray of food I could not eat. A kind-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Neal drew me a bath and did not ask questions, which is the highest form of compassion a stranger can offer. I sat by the fire and I shook, not from cold, from the delayed impact of what had just happened. The altar, the dress, the hand, the voice, the power is in the wrist. And the realization that the boy I had taught to skip stones was the Duke of Thornleigh, the cold Duke, the man all of England feared. He came to see me that evening. He knocked, he waited. He did not enter until I said, "Come in." These details mattered. Every detail of politeness, of deference, of giving me the choice that had been taken from me. Every detail was deliberate. This was a man who understood what it meant to have your autonomy stolen, because his father had stolen his. He sat across from me by the fire, with the careful distance of a man who knows that proximity can feel like threat to someone who has just been freed. "You are safe here," he said. "No one will compel you to do anything. You may stay as long as you wish. You may leave whenever you wish. This is your home for as long as you want it. and not a moment longer. You said you searched for me. For 8 years. Why? He looked at the fire. Because when I was 12 years old, a girl in a torn dress climbed over a fence and told me I was doing something wrong. No one had ever told me I was doing something wrong. No one, not my father, not my tutors, not a single person in my entire immaculate, unbearable life had ever looked at me and seen a boy who needed to be taught, instead of an heir who needed to be managed. He paused. I spent 8 years being the cold duke. I earned the name, I cultivated it. I wore it like your uncle locked you in that room because it was safer than being open. And being open meant remembering you, and remembering you meant admitting that the only person who had ever made me feel like a human being was gone. His ice blue eyes met mine. You are not gone, he said. And I am not cold. I have been holding a stone for 12 years waiting for someone to teach me how to throw it again. The Duke of Thornleigh did not destroy my uncle. He disassembled him. Within a week, Calum's solicitors had produced a complete accounting of the Blackwell estate. Every pound spent, every investment lost, every shilling siphoned into Uncle Gerald's personal debts. The total was staggering. £8,000 of inheritance gone, plus the income from the estate, plus the proceeds from the sale of my mother's paintings and my father's cello and the furniture and the silver and anything else that could be converted to cash and fed into the bottomless appetite of Gerald Blackwell's incompetence. The documents were presented to the Court of Chancery. Uncle Gerald was stripped of his guardianship. Hartwood House, still technically mine, though mortgaged beyond value, was reclaimed. Lord Vane, confronted with the collapse of his arranged marriage and the exposure of his debts, withdrew to the continent, where he would spend the next decade losing at cards in increasingly disreputable establishments until the cards, and the debts, and the drink finished what his character had started. My uncle came to Thornleigh Park on the day the court ruling was issued. He came to beg, not for forgiveness, but for money. He could not tell the difference. Calum received him in the entrance hall. He did not invite him to sit. You locked her in a room, the Duke said. For 6 weeks. You sold her mother's paintings. You sold her father's cello. You spent her inheritance on canal schemes that a child could have seen were fraudulent. And when you had nothing left to sell, you sold her. I was trying to provide for her. You were trying to provide for yourself. There is a difference, and you knew it, and you did it anyway, because she was a woman alone with no one to protect her, and you assumed that no one would come. He stepped forward. The cold mask was on. Perfect, glacial. The mask that had made the Ton call him heartless and had made 100 wedding guests freeze where they sat. Someone came, he said. And I suggest you leave this house before I demonstrate exactly how unkind the cold Duke of Thornleigh can be to a man who deserved nothing better. Uncle Gerald left. He took nothing with him. He had nothing left to take. In the spring, when the ice melted and the lake returned to its summer self, green, still, patient, I walked to the water's edge and found a flat stone. I had been living at Thornleigh Park for 4 months. I had my own rooms, my own routine, my own autonomy, a word I said to myself every morning like a prayer, because after 6 weeks in a locked room, autonomy is not a right, but a resurrection. Calum had been patient, impossibly, infuriatingly, beautifully patient. He did not push, he did not presume, he did not attempt to translate his rescue into a claim. He gave me time and space, and the freedom to heal at my own pace, and the only indication that he felt anything beyond friendship was the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't looking, the same way he had looked at me across the church with ice on the outside and everything burning underneath. I found a flat stone. I skipped it across the lake. 5 bounces, my best ever. Show off, said a voice behind me. He was standing at the edge of the trees, dark blonde hair, blue eyes, no greatcoat this time, just shirt sleeves and the spring air, and a face that was trying very hard to be composed and failing beautifully. You remember, I said. I remember everything. He walked to the water's edge. He picked up a stone. He turned it in his fingers, considering the weight. I remember you told me the power is in the wrist. I remember you tore your dress on the fence and did not care. I remember you counted the clouds and told me fish had feelings and said the world would be better if everyone climbed a tree. He looked at me. I remember you were the only person who ever told me I was doing something wrong, and I remember that being told I was wrong by you was the first time anything in my life felt right. He threw the stone. 6 bounces. Show off, I said. I practiced, he said, for 12 years at this lake. Every day for 12 years I came down here and I skipped stones because it was the only thing I had left of you. The morning light caught the water, turning it to shattered gold. The trees were green, the fence between our properties, the one I had climbed in a torn dress when I was 8 was still there, weathered but standing. Calum? Yes. I'm going to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly. Not as the Duke, not as the man who rescued me, as the boy who couldn't skip stones. Ask, do you love me? Not the girl from the lake, not the memory, not the child, not the idea of me that you've carried for 12 years. Me, the woman standing here now, who spent 6 weeks locked in a room and still flinches when doors close too quickly. Do you love me? He set down the stone. I love the girl from the lake, he said. I will not lie about that. I loved her before I knew what love meant. But the girl from the lake taught me to skip stones, and the woman standing here taught me something harder. She taught me that love is not a rescue. It is not a church door and 5 words and a ride through the snow. Those are gestures. Love is the part that comes after. The patience, the waiting, the standing at a lake for 4 months, knowing that the woman you would die for needs time to decide if she can live with you. He paused. I love you, Honoria. The woman, not the memory, not the child, you who are braver than the girl I knew, and fiercer and sadder and more beautiful than anything I imagined in 12 years of imagining. And if you tell me you need another 4 months, I will wait. And if you tell me you need 4 years, I will wait. And if you tell me you need... Oh, for God's sake, I said, stop talking and skip a stone. He blinked. I picked up a flat stone and placed it in his hand. Our fingers touched, his warm, mine cold, both unsteady. Wrist, I said, not arm. He looked at me. The ice, the 12-year cold Duke, 100 frozen guests' ice shattered entirely, and what came through was not cold at all, but a blaze so bright and total that I felt it in my teeth. He threw the stone. It skipped 7 times. New record, I said. New everything, he said, and he kissed me beside the lake where we had begun, with the water green and still and patient, and the fence still standing between 2 properties that would, by summer, be one. We married in September in St. Clements, yes, the same church. Calum wanted to choose a different one, somewhere without the memory of Vane and the veil and the 100 frozen faces, but I wanted St. Clements. I wanted to walk up the same aisle, in a dress I chose myself, to a man I chose myself, and replace the memory of a cage with the memory of a door opening. The church was full, not with Vane's guests, not with Uncle Gerald's accomplices, not with people who had come to watch a transaction. It was full of tenants, servants, neighbors, the vicar's wife, Mrs. Kemp, who had sent the letter, and the Duke's steward who had been quietly weeping since the engagement was announced, because, he said, I have served 3 Dukes of Thornleigh, and this is the first one who has ever been happy. The dowager, Calum's mother, a quiet woman who had survived her husband's coldness by becoming invisible, sat in the front pew and held a handkerchief and said nothing, which for her was the loudest expression of joy she had ever permitted herself. Calum stood at the altar. He wore no greatcoat, no snow clung to his boots. His ice-blue eyes were not cold. They were clear, the blue of a lake in summer, the blue of a sky that has decided to stay. I walked to him. I was not shaking. I was not performing. I was not a puppet in silk, a transaction in lace, a debt dressed in white. I was Honoria Blackwell. I was the girl from the lake. I was the woman who had survived a locked room and a stolen inheritance and an altar that was almost a grave, and I was choosing. He took my hand. The same hand he had offered in the church 8 months ago, steady, patient, the hand of a man who had ridden 47 miles through the snow on the word of a former housekeeper who remembered that some things are worth riding for. Wrist, not arm, I whispered. He laughed. The vicar, who had not been warned about private jokes between the bride and groom, looked confused but continued. We spoke our vows, we exchanged rings, we were married, and if the Duke of Thornleigh was, for the remainder of his life, occasionally found at the edge of the Thornleigh Park Lake, skipping flat stones across the water, with a concentration entirely disproportionate to the activity, well, some lessons once learned bear repeating. The power is in the wrist. The power was always in the wrist.